But it's not Tarbell if we don't go up the trail.
Coming in at 22.5 miles with around 3,900 feet of climbing, the Tarbell Loop is the Portland area's most accessible classical, epic single-track loop. And by most accessible, I mean it's the easiest to drive to. I'll put a TrailForks link to this loop in the description to this video, because the directions to the Yackle Burn parking area are kind of convoluted if you've never been here before. From this parking area, you'll jump on the Tarbell Trail right here. Look lively here, because there will probably be a lot of people coming down this trail. This is the one choke point on the trail system, and this area is getting more popular. Instead of going to the left up the road like you would if you were climbing the trail to ride Sixth Sense or Cold Creek, take a right here at this junction just a little ways past the trailhead. Now you're on Tarbell. The grade you're climbing now is known to the locals around here as Murphy's Grade. We're riding up the trail today instead of the road because this is the Tarbell Loop. And you can't claim to have ridden the Tarbell Loop if you haven't actually climbed the Tarbell Trail. Murphy's Grade is a pretty tame climb up an old railroad grade that was used for logging a long time ago. You won't see much, if any, downhill traffic on this part of the Tarbell until you get to this intersection right here. Now, fun fact, this grade is not part of the original Tarbell alignment. The trail known to the locals as Cold Creek, that's a fishhook turn to your right and down the hill, is the original Tarbell alignment. These mountains are crisscrossed with old logging and mining roads, so every trail has lots of different alignments and it can get confusing. Watch this video closely and follow what I do in order to remain on the Tarbell Trail. Basically, don't go down the hill and don't go up the really steep grade. Follow the less steep grade and you'll find that you have remained on the Tarbell Loop. Now you're riding up Cold Creek. Be vigilant because there will be mountain bikers coming down the trail right at you. When you get to this bridge that crosses Cold Creek, the real climbing starts. What you've been doing up to this point was just a rehearsal for the real climb ahead. Although the ride you're doing is 22 miles long, more than half of the climbing you'll do on this ride happens in the first 4.5 miles. It's important you don't let yourself get demoralized during this part of the ride. Like, you're going to wonder while you're making this climb if you'll survive through the rest of this ride. Trust me, you'll survive. Besides, this is one of the prettiest parts of the ride. The forest through here has mostly recovered from clear cuts that happened before we wised up to the fact that you shouldn't be clear cutting right next to streams, so it's becoming some genuinely remarkable forest again. You can really lose yourself in here if you let it happen. Again, I can't stress this enough, be hyper vigilant for any bikers coming down the trail at you through this section. Although this is no longer the only way to get down the mountain on a mountain bike in this area, this trail is still a very popular downhill route that's a lot of fun to ride down, which is what you're not doing today because today you're climbing this trail. You're going to really feel every bit of the 2,000 feet you're climbing in this first 4.5 miles. Presently, about halfway up the first half of the initial climb, you'll arrive at this road crossing with what's officially known as the 1070 road, a permanently gated logging road. This is also the first bailout point if you've bitten off more than you can chew. You could either go back the way you came or just go left down the road, and the road goes all the way down to the bottom and it meets up with the entrance of Sixth Sense. It meets up the parking lot right that you already parked at. But you've only climbed 1,100 feet, so you should really keep going. The trail that'll take you to the top of the mountain is straight in front of you. Ride up that trail. This section through this clear cut is relentlessly steep, just like every other climb on this ride is going to be. This is another area you want to keep a close eye out for anyone coming down the hill at you. This clear cut used to be a forest of beautiful 100-year-old trees that had self-regenerated after the Yackle Burn raged through here in 1905. This clear cut is just like every other clear cut in that the trail requires constant maintenance to keep it rideable, as the logging companies have successfully offloaded the cost of keeping up recreational assets after they've ruined them onto the rest of us. Soon the trail enters the trees again, and this is easily one of the most beautiful pieces of forest on the ride. We're extremely fortunate the DNR hasn't cut this forest down yet. Enjoy it while it lasts because the DNR is selling all of these trees into a glutted market for cheap. Most of the intact forest for the rest of this ride is what's known as primary regen. That's forest that naturally regenerated after a burn and hasn't been cut down. This is unique habitat that we're choosing to sell at bargain basement prices to fund less than 2% of the school budget for the state of Washington. Anyway, this patch of trees is gorgeous. For now. About 3/4 of the way up, you'll come across this beautiful little rock outcropping we call Cougar Rocks. Probably because someone saw a cougar there. I don't know. You can pedal up this, but you've still got another 20 miles to go at this point, so I'd really recommend that you push the bike up this little section. Save your legs, because you are going to need them later. In not too long, you'll arrive at the picnic table. This is where most locals end their evening rides and turn around if they're riding after work. There's a picnic table here, and there's this scree field affectionately called the dinner plates of death. Every year, the tread here gets a little bit better, at least until the moto guys poach it and chew it up again. You'll have to push your bike up this, but it's only for about 1/8 of a mile. The view up here is fantastic. On a clear day, you can see Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens. Plus, you can enjoy the view of all the new clear cuts you're going to be riding through soon when you get to the other side of the valley. The mountain you're gazing upon from across the valley is Silver Star Mountain. This is one of the prettiest hikes with the best views near the Portland area. You can see that the top of the mountain looks kind of like an alpine environment, and that is because it's never recovered from the Yakult burn. That's why this area is referred to as the Yakult burn, because it all burned down in 1905. Keep going. You're almost to the top of the first climb. The trail is very rocky, with limited topsoil above the picnic table, but it's totally rideable if you don't let it freak you out. It also helps to have a full suspension bike for this to give added traction over the loose rocks. The DNR just came through here with weed whackers, but this section could get grown over pretty badly some years. Make sure you have some Benadryl cream in the car. When you get to this intersection, take the spur to the left. Don't go the other way unless you just want to go to the top of Larch Mountain. Go left. After your left turn, the trail will take you to this intersection with a cool old sign at it. From here, you want to fish hook left down the hill. You definitely want to go down the hill here. I'm just talking to give you time to see what the camera is doing. This is the first downhill descent on this ride. Go left, not right. And this downhill was worth the climb. The nice thing about doing the Tarbell Loop is that it's the only way to work this descent into a ride that really makes any sense. This really is a fantastic descent. But it's only about 900 feet, and doing it without completing the loop would mean that you would lose another 1,000 feet on a road, and nobody wants that. The Tarbell is an old hiking trail, and so this descent rides like an old hiking descent. Mountain bikers don't get to this backside of the mountain often enough to really do much more than basic maintenance, so nothing has been buffed out, and all the kickers and jibs are whatever nature provided. The tread is good hard pack with rocks in it and needles on it. The grade is steep enough that there are a lot of fun route step downs, and there's enough twists and turns to keep the descent interesting. There is a brief interlude of climbing in this descent about halfway down, but if you were worried about additional climbing, you wouldn't do this loop, now would you? Then, after the brief climbing interlude, it's game on again for more descending. You'll get about 2 more minutes of downhill fun, but in this case, the trail kind of just beelines down the hill. You'll want to keep a good lookout for hikers here, by the way. There seem to be a lot of hikers on this side of Larch, probably because there is a parking area at the bottom of this descent, and it's poorly signed, and so they think they're climbing up Silver Star when they're actually climbing up Larch Mountain. As you get near the bottom of this descent, be courteous. Maybe even ask the hikers if they know that they're not currently climbing Silver Star. The trail dumps out here at the Grouse Creek Vista parking area. This, as I just mentioned, is where most hikers begin their trek up Silver Star Mountain. This is also the second major bailout point if you're feeling like you're not up to the rest of the ride. If you need to head back to the car, you can turn left down the road and coast downhill for about 4 miles until you meet with the L1000 and you can turn left. If you're not going to bail out, cross the road here and proceed up the trail. Proceed forward until you see this sign. Now, if you want to have some real fun, you can go to the right and climb up Silver Star. It'll add another 1,000 feet of climbing to the ride, but if it's a sunny day and you've got the time, you'll earn some fantastic views out of it. But you're not crazy, so go to the left and remain on the Tarbell Loop. From here, the trail really just sort of meanders along up and down a side hill for a mile or two. This forest has inexplicably survived the chainsaw for now, so you get to ride through a nice example of what a forest can look like, a bit over a century after a historic fire has wiped it out. Everything in this forest is just so natural and just pleasing. Occasionally, the trail opens up onto miniature exposures and rocky outcroppings like this one before poking back into the woods. Overall, this is just a darn pleasant place to ride your bike. Or, for that matter, it's a darn pleasant place to go for a hike, too. The only downside to hiking this section over biking it is it doesn't really hook up to anything remarkable within a short hiking distance. That's why I recommend riding this, because on a bike, it makes sense. Which is why you rarely see hikers. At least I rarely see hikers when I ride this section. The tread through here is in great shape, and the trail as of this year is very rideable as the Department of Natural Resources has gotten in here to clear out the trail. After a couple of miles, the trail takes you to here, Rock Creek Falls, which has this very nicely built bridge across it. I can only imagine what this traverse would be like without the bridge. It would be awful. If it's a hot day, you need to stop here to filter some water because you've got another fairly significant climb ahead of you before you get to the next water source. After the falls, there's a rolling up and down meander for less than a mile or so. It's more of the same kind of fun you've been having, crossing the road in Grouse Creek Vista, and then suddenly, the trail opens up onto this fabulous example of corporate welfare courtesy of the state of Washington. This is also the beginning of the second largest climb on this ride. What used to be pristine primary regen forest has been converted into clear cut for the cut rate of less than $1 million. Yes, that's right. One of the timber sales over here that took out a grove of beautiful 80 to 100-year-old trees that were absolutely irreplaceable habitat and prime recreational area within an hour's drive of Portland was sold for less than $1 million. That's not even enough to run most school districts for a day. One of the few redeeming qualities of this recently decimated section of once pristine forest is that the destruction does open up great views of the surrounding valley so that you can see the other pristine forest they cut in the last 5 years. Not a single one of the timber sales that you can see from here was actual tree farm. It was all 80 to 100-year-old primary regen that has been converted to tree farm in the middle of a glutted timber market. All we did was fire up the mill so Washington could sell off irreplaceable environmental assets at a steep loss. Also, the timber companies didn't do a very good job of restoring the trail through this section. You'll probably need to get off and walk the bike a few times. I know the hot sun can be oppressive through these sections, but cheer up. Your suffering is helping pump more wood products into a glutted market so we can keep building oversized McMansions in the middle of the continent. Totally worth the sacrifice. This really was a beautiful section of trail before the timber companies got to it. Ride it soon because trails through clear cuts degrade and get grown over very quickly. And the timber companies are not on the hook for the increased maintenance costs incurred after they've got away the tree cover. So, this section of trail has a maximum of 3 years before it's completely grown over, and the Department of Natural Resources doesn't get to these sections frequently enough to keep them reliably passable. It's just another cost the timber companies have passed on to us. After crossing the new logging road that was cut into the woods here, the trail continues climbing, paralleling the road until it finds this nice grove of trees as you get a much needed descent down some more classic old school hiking trail with a nice bedded in tread that also has some nice tight turns until you come out onto this vista, which is another fabulous view opened up by more corporate welfare in the form of another enormous clear cut. You can see Mount St. Helens from here. This descent is a total blast though. Well, it is when the trail has been brushed out, which actually happened this year. So since the trail is clear, this descent is so much fun. It's old school hiking trail again, through a clear cut type of trail though. So the tread is mostly gone, replaced by the rocks that are left over as the topsoil washes away or disappears as dust during the drier months. The turns are super tight on this one, so it's a great opportunity to work on your cornering skills. Just drink this one in and really enjoy it. At the bottom of this descent, shortly after the trail enters back into the woods, you'll come to Hidden Falls, which is really just the star attraction of this ride. There's no easy way to get to Hidden Falls, which is sort of what's cool about it. It's a unique waterfall, just like all the others. Unique like all the others. The equestrians like to tie their horses up near the falls, so the smell of manure can get oppressive during the summer. Also make sure to watch your step. Assuming you got here on a day that it doesn't smell like poop, this is a great place to stop for lunch. The falls is gorgeous. Totally worth the hike. From here, the third largest climb on this ride begins. The trail climbs up a series of 7 obnoxiously steep switchbacks. Seriously, it's like whoever built this section of trail was in a competition to see who could build the most stupidly steep switchbacks. It makes no sense. You only do like 500 feet of climbing in this section, but it feels like way more because of these switchbacks. After the obnoxious switchbacks, the trail kind of flattens out a little bit in side hills before popping out onto another clear cut, which then meets up with the road crossing. It's pretty obvious where the trail continues after this, so just keep going. When you get to this sign, keep going on the left fork. To the right is the beginning of the Chinook Trail, which will eventually take you to the top of Silver Star. So if you're just jonesing for an extra 2,000 feet of climbing, go that way. Anyhow, this section does some more side hilling here with some fun little downhill thrown in as a teaser. Keep in mind that those really steep switchbacks you climbed a while back only represent half of the 500 feet of climbing you need to do on this second to last big climb of the ride. This last little bit of climbing you'll have to do as the trail rounds Kluchman Butte isn't really that significant by itself, but no matter what you're doing, generally you're doing this otherwise insignificant climb at the end of a lot more climbing. So it feels more significant than it really is. I definitely remember pushing my old hardtail up this hill once or twice a long time ago after coming back down from the top of Silver Star when I was just getting started mountain biking. I mean, now it's fine. I definitely don't have to push it now. It's definitely not a grade you'll need to get off the bike for. As you come around the end of Kluchman Butte, the trail opens back up onto another scenic clear cut that gives you a commanding view of Dole Valley. This also happens to be where the best bit of downhill on the whole ride begins, and boy, what a piece of downhill it is. This is one of those descents that you just don't really get to do all that often because it's a little harder to get to this side of the mountain and it requires a bit more work to get to a spot where this descent is accessible. But it's totally worth it if you can manage to get over here, and there are other rides that lead up to this very important descent, so there are some other ones to look for. It's even worth doing as it out and back. Passing through clear cuts and in and out of patches of working forest, there isn't really anything remarkable in particular about this descent. It's not super steep and it isn't super technical. It's more of that old school hiker trail. Now, it seems to be a rule that every time I ride this loop, I get rained on at the beginning or at the end, so pardon the raindrops on the lens. Just choose to interpret it as a nice way to add character to this video. There are a lot of clear cuts in this section. Just a word to the wise, never climb this part of the trail unless you absolutely have to. One of the reasons I'm showing you this ride in the counterclockwise direction is because of this section. It's a killer fun blast going down this, and it's a descent you rarely get to experience just because of how the topography lines up around here, but climbing this section is worse than the initial climb up Cold Creek because it happens in about 90% clear cut. On a gray, drizzly day, it's not too bad, but you don't want to be in these clear cuts when it's hot and sunny. It's worse than the desert. After this last forested section, which is beautiful, by the way, the trail will take you out onto this clear cut that has some of the most awesomely technical sections of the downhill. This is where you're going to want to start really keeping your eyes peeled for horse poop on the trail. When you get to this intersection, you'll need to take the left fork. This is near the Tarbell day use area, which is a good place to access this section of trail in the future if you're interested in an out and back. After the day use area, the trail climbs a little, then descends a little before it crosses this road. The descending awesomeness continues from here. This is about the halfway point on the 1,500 foot descent. What I like about this downhill section is that it's very different from the Cold Creek descent and many other descents in the Cascades because it's much more gradual and varied. There are twists and turns and little climbs on your way down. It passes through a plethora of varied landscapes and varied soil types and terrains. All that variety makes this descent take twice as long as what you would normally expect from a mountain bike descent, which makes sense, of course, because this isn't a mountain bike trail. It's a hiking trail that bikes are allowed on. This road crossing right here is the least intuitive of all the crossings. Just go left up the hill and you'll find it, and continue along on your merry way as the fun just keeps coming. Some of these rocky and dark forested sections on the way down do get kind of scary and weird. The trail gets gnarly and technical in here with a lot of little ankle breaking surprises, so be very careful. Look lively and keep on your toes. When you get to this bridge, you're almost at the Rock Creek campground. On the other side of Rock Creek, which would totally be classified as a river in some states, you are no longer required to go through the campground to continue the loop. The trail has been extended around the campground. After the campground, you'll cross this paved road, which is the L1000, by the way, and begin the last climb back to the car. This climb isn't fun. There's really nothing enjoyable about this climb at all. It's just there. The day we rode it, it looked like the DNR hadn't quite gotten around to brushing out this section because it was a little shop of horrors in there. Wet vegetation leads to wet and miserable riders. Eventually, the trail will cross the L1000 yet again, and you'll embark on the last 0.8 of a mile back to the car. This is that notorious, infamous section of Tarbell that got included as the last section of the Cascadia Dirt Cup last year. It was that section that everyone was mad about. Well, it's just as much fun to climb as descend it, which is not fun at all. There are a lot of surprise uphill rock gardens on this trail, and they're uphill both ways and in the worst possible spots. You're actually going to have to dismount from the bike to get up this on a wet day. It's crazy. After all you've been through today, this is where you're going to have to get off the bike. Now, my battery died right before I could finish this ride, and it was wet and I didn't want to fiddle with it, so because I was tired, and it was like 0.4 miles from the car. So now we're just going to switch over to some video I got on a much nicer day, because this trail eventually joins up at the bottom of 6th Sense. So ride this trail on a nice day, and this is what you'll see as you head back to the car. The trail crosses the road, and you should be able to find the parking lot from here. And that's it. You've done the Tarbell Loop. It's a massive epic. You're probably going to feel more tired than the elevation numbers suggest, and that's because this trail is pretty darn steep in places, but that's okay because even on my worst days, I've enjoyed riding this loop, and so will you. I'm confident. Now, help me keep making these videos. By the way, this is the longest video I've made. I'm looking at my recording right now, and I'm already past 22 minutes, which is crazy. So if you're still with me, kudos, because I wouldn't be. Anyway, help me keep making these videos by clicking the like button, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing. Heck, click the dislike button if you didn't like this video, and let me know what you think in the comments. I'm all ears. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.